Right, fantastic. Let's see how long this lasts.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, Orange.
Has joined the conference.
Okay, everybody, hopefully you can hear me now. Welcome and thanks for joining us at the fourth of the new series of Identity Hangouts that are designed to share with you what's going on in the identity space, as well as providing you with a deep dive into a specific topic. This week, we're fortunate to be joined by Pavan Challa from Verizon to discuss their vision for RCS, and in particular how rich messaging capability can be combined with identity and payment capabilities for supporting commerce services of the future. We'd like these Hangouts to be dynamic and collaborative, so please feel free to ping over any questions throughout this webinar using the Blue Jeans chat function on your console, and send your message to Jekaterina, who's our moderator, and we'll try and address those during the session. But before we start, I'd like to give you a short summary of the identity program here in the GSMA. There's been loads going on since we last met. I was really pleased to see that in Germany, the operators have recently launched their identity services using Mobile Connect. And then that was quickly followed up by the Juniper report, which was released forecasting that operators would play a more significant role as ID brokers in this space. And there was there's potential for a 7 billion opportunity there. We also saw a number of other product launches, particularly across Europe. We saw more of the operators launching in Russia, and we saw KPN in the Netherlands launch their service, being the first operator in that market. We also saw real interest from service providers in India, with Times Internet, the largest media company in India, starting to use the service at the end of August. Across in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, the government released their RFP to support, looking to help to design the ID platform that they want to use in the future, and using their partner MCC to be able to provide that. And the GSMA will be hosting a co-workshop with them at the end of this month, where they'll be exploring what those opportunities could look like for Malaysia as a country. Here in the UK, I'm really excited about the Mobile Connect Summit, which will be happening next week. Very much focused on the monetization of attributes. The UK operators have made real strides forward in this space, and I think they're starting to develop really successful businesses, working with some of the largest SPs in the UK. And then that will be soon followed up by the GSMA event in LA, Mobile World Congress Los Angeles, which will be taking place on the 22nd to the 24th of October, where again identity will play a significant role in the topics that we discussed. And we'll also be having an identity seminar where hopefully we'll hear from the US operators and the progress that they've made with their Project Verify. And we'll have a number of showcases taking place on the city, one of which will be that service offered by the US operators. And then we'll have a number of other examples of how identity is being integrated with other capabilities like IoT, 5G, and showcasing the value of those joined up services. And we'll also have a GSMA space there where you'll be able to ask the experts in terms of understanding how identity and those capabilities will come together. But with all of that said,
has left the conference.
With that said, I'd like to just hand over to David, who's going to take us through the main section of this session today.
Thanks, Rich. This is David Pollington. I work within the GSMA across a number of different programs looking after identity. We have a number of different interesting projects around identity. Today, we're going to focus on the role of identity and payment as it relates to rich messaging, and in particular, the RCS framework. So we've been joined by Pavan Challa from Verizon, who's going to talk with us about what their perception is of RCS within their own market in North America, and to really discuss with us where we see this exciting opportunity going. Pavan, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Hey, my name is Pavan Challa. I am Director for Product Management here at Verizon, focusing on customer experience platforms in which messaging and identity are two key pillars. My team is responsible for identifying future customer experience platforms and products that can be built on top of them. So RCS deployment and product strategy and identity management for Verizon are both part of my responsibility here.
Okay, thanks for that. That's very interesting. So, Pavan, I guess, before we sort of jump into this, we need to give a quick kind of overview of what RCS is. Is that something you'd be happy to pick up and just give the audience your perspective of what RCS means to the average man in the street?
Yeah, sure. I think RCS has a lot of potential. Okay, I'm sure most folks on the call are probably more well-versed than I am, but now that I can talk, I'll talk. RCS stands for Rich Communication Services. It's the next iteration of SMS and MMS. There are a bunch of GSMA and other standards that support it, including Universal Profile 2.3. Basically, there are two components of it. One being what's called P2P messaging, peer-to-peer messaging, that basically brings in certain OTT features that are available today, including read-write indicators, ability to send large files of up to 100 meg right now, and also have rich feed cards that you would see on apps. On the other end is the ability to integrate to A2P, which would provide a messaging as a platform in the backend. That would provide a more enriching experience between brands and consumers. Today, when you interact with any of common example would be you would get a note from your airline saying that, hey, your flight is delayed, which is probably a 140 character message with a hyperlink. In the future, that same message could be a lot more interactive, have an image, and also provide a call to action, whether it is changing your flight or doing other things or buying a launch ticket. So RCS opens up a lot of rich communication, both between peer-to-peer, but also between the brands and the consumers.
That's great. Thanks for that. And I guess the focus of this Hangout will be primarily around the A2P, the application to person, essentially allowing businesses to connect with their consumer base, reach out, interact with them, and hopefully transact with them in the future with the inclusion of things like payment services. So I guess, the big question is why do businesses like using messaging for connecting with their customers? There's been a lot of sort of stats and surveys in this space. It appears that in terms of things like messaging, the open rate of an SMS message is a lot higher than things like email. The reaction rate, the click-through rate, if you like, of using the messaging channel as a way of interacting with consumers again is a lot better than companies have seen using other forms of interaction such as email. And whilst in the past native apps have been quite prevalent and quite popular, again, we're starting to see a bit of a decline. I think there's been a 20% decline in the US around people downloading and using apps. Often they perhaps download the app, but they only ever use it once, if at all. And there is obviously the distribution cost and the development cost of maintaining those apps in the field. So using the native messaging capabilities of mobile phones is really a no-brainer for a lot of businesses to connect with their customers. And, what RCS brings to this is essentially an enhancement of that messaging capability with a richer set of functionality to enable some of those use cases that Pavan was touching on there. So I think, the first thing really that'd be good to sort of talk about a bit more is when we talk about RCS, what do we mean by rich communication? So what are these new rich capabilities that RCS can bring? For those online, you should be able to see a slide which gives you, flags some of the different capabilities that RCS brings to the party. Pavan, do you want to give your perspective on what makes RCS richer than the previous messaging capabilities?
Like I mentioned earlier, so RCS provides a couple of capabilities that on the peer-to-peer side will bring it up to parity with iMessages or WhatsApp and other messaging services that are right now, which is more a more richer cards within the messaging text, suggested messages, suggested responses, and sharing large files between the consumers. So those are the key factors when it comes to peer-to-peer messaging that bring in. And again, this is just the initial iteration of it. Once consumers move to this platform, there would be other things that can be done on top here. Overall, this just enables the platform to go from the restricted 140 characters or message transfers to things like GIFs and even short form video and a whole bunch of other items that haven't been as successful. But I believe in Japan, the sticker store the sticker store that lets you add stickers as responses to your messages has been very successful, and the carriers are able to monetize that space significantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one of the areas that has been creating issues in the past around things like phishing and spoofing in the messaging domain. One of the things that the brands really like about RCS is the ability to put their brand in front of the end user to try and reassure the user that this is a legitimate message. There will be capabilities like verified sender. And, if you're using this channel as a means of reaching out to consumer base, the fact that actually you can then monitor things like the click-through rates gives you an ability to actually then assess how accurate and how beneficial your campaign has been using this channel. So there's a whole bunch of facilities and functionality within RCS that really does, raise the game, if you like, in terms of the way that businesses can interact with their consumers. So just to sort of put it into perspective in terms of the rich experience compared to what perhaps people have seen in the past using SMS. On this slide here, you can see essentially an SMS-based campaign on the left where you have someone who has a British Gas, a utility company, coming to visit their property. So it's pretty basic. There isn't much that you can really get out of that interaction. Whereas on the right, using RCS, you can have a much more interactive dialogue with the user in terms of rescheduling if that time is no longer convenient for that householder, understanding who it is from the gas board who's actually going to be coming to see them so they can verify the authenticity of the British Gas engineer. And it's just a much more interactive and richer experience for the end customer. And anecdotally, where RCS has started being used for these kind of campaigns, it's shown a much bigger response rate from consumers. They like to have this richer experience. They like the interactivity. They like to be able to connect with the companies via these conversational interfaces. So I guess, Pavan, you started talking about some of the different use cases that RCS could be used for. We probably spoke about things like booking flights or buying clothes or any kind of travel ticket, or perhaps checking on account status with banks, etc. I mean, what do you see in the North American market as some of the killer use cases that you think are really going to become the most frequent, the most dominant?
I think there's a lot of, as you guys know, I think everybody's in different phases of launching RCS in North America. But we do see a lot of interest from brands right now, as you mentioned, that want a verified transaction with the consumer. There's also a lot of conversation with brands that want to have a whole holistic 360-degree conversation. For example, if an insurance company is trying to call a customer, but that particular customer is at work and not able to interact at that time, if that transaction can be now moved towards a more rich communication service as a fallback, the same transactions could happen over text message. Similarly, CVS today sends out, CVS is a large pharmaceutical company here in the US that actually dispenses medicines. They make over 1 million calls a day at ballpark to remind customers to pick up their medicines, because if the customer doesn't pick up the medicine, they actually don't get paid for it, and the medicine has to be thrown out. It's a waste either way. So for them to complete that interaction with the customer is a lot more important, and for them to be able to send a text message that's verified with CVS logo on top, and their ability to either reorder the prescription or hold it for a longer period of time or cancel the prescription would be a lot more time saving, both for CVS and for the consumer. So that's one side of transactional commerce that's happening today right now that could move into text messages from the voice calling. Then there is the other side of the conversation where a lot of experiences happen within an app, and usually consumers download an app and they don't use that app for more than 5 days after downloading, because that particular transaction that they wanted to do could have happened only on the app, and then they move on to other things. So for a brand to actually spend the time and energy to actually create an app that is only going to be used for a short period of time and try to get penetration of that app to continue to keep that consumer engagement is a very high cost effort. So RCS can help there, where instead of using an app for those transactions, the consumers can, the brands can use a chatbot or an enriched messaging to solve for the same problem. So you could think of a whole bunch of, the vision would be like in the near future, there would be an average consumer would probably interact with just 5 of his most favorite apps. I'll make mine. I would be probably Starbucks, Uber, United, and Marriott, because I travel quite a bit. So those would be my top apps because that's who I chain with. But every other transaction, if I'm trying to go to Gap because I just want to return something, I would rather want to do that over a chatbot with Gap. So hey, I'm going to use brands that are familiar to the US. If anybody needs to know what they are, please do let me know. I'll try to use generic brands as much as possible so you understand the context. So those transactions I would expect to happen over the text messaging. Similarly, a lot of conversations today with respect to making bookings with the dental or car appointments happen through a phone or a website where you go and create your appointments. All those transactions, I would anticipate moving towards RCS. That would enable a whole bunch of those experiences where I could call in or do a search for the nearest car dealership and try to get to an appointment, and that could be achieved through a chatbot instead of me having to have access to a web portal or an actual app.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, we've seen this transition from web browsers to native apps, and often you find when you look under the hood that a lot of the native apps are actually just exposing a web view, and essentially it's a browser within an app. But it gives the user the impression that they've got that native app experience. The benefit with RCS is that you have all this capability intrinsically within the device. And as you say, a business can quite easily knock out a chatbot that is able to then use the RCS rich functionality to create an experience which is equivalent to a native app, but without the distribution hassles of having to get it out there and maintain it in the field. I guess we've kind of talked a bit about some use cases are kind of P2A, so it could be things where the customer is trying to find some information from a company, like opening hours. A to P is really the evolution from what we have today with SMS, where you mentioned things like doctor's appointments, reminders, things like gate information when you're traveling at airports, etc. I guess it'd be interesting to discuss with you, Pavan, around the importance of trust. So if this channel is really going to be used, for all these wonderful things, to what extent does the user need to be able to trust the chatbot that they're interacting with, that it's authentic to a company, and how does a company ensure that they're actually transacting with the right person? And if it's a commerce transaction, how do they ensure they get paid? If it's a bank, how do they ensure that it's the account holder? Do you have a particular perspective on the role of identity and trust, and how that might be needed to really underpin a lot of these different kind of use cases?
Yeah, before jumping into identity, I think just RCS in itself or SMS before that, at least in the US, is considered a more trusted means of communication. As you know, most of password research happen through an SMS, not proposing that be the process because that is prone to fraud. But consumers in the US are more comfortable getting a text message from a brand on their text rather than, say, a WhatsApp or an OTT line. I think that is a fundamental difference because SMS is still considered a carrier-based service, and consumers trust their carriers a lot more with a lot of transactions. Talking about the US market here. But moving on to now engage in interactions that are beyond normal information back and forth between brands and consumers. I think building the trust and being able to verify an identity of a customer is very important both for the brands and for the consumers. So there is a sense of positive friction when you are engaging with a bank, right? For example, when you're trying to search for an airlines, you go to a website and you type in EWR to London Heathrow. Usually that search transaction takes a fraction of a second, but you see that hourglass spinning for a second or two before the results show up. This is a cognitive impact to the consumer to assume that there has been some work being done on their behalf. That makes it make them believe that the results that showed is based on some solid hard work on the back end. Similarly, when you interact with a bank, there is some amount of hurdle to get in to make you feel comfortable that the transaction is not so seamless that it feels like you don't have any control over who gets in or out of your account. So anyhow, what I mean to bring up here is I think having a step-up identity or authentication for transactions would be meaningful to actually create that trust for customers to transact higher valued interactions within the chat. Whether it is you're trying to buy with Macy's, which is a large chain here for clothing, or you're trying to make a bank payment. Consumers here are okay with having reset password links coming through SMS and being able to provide a PIN to reset your password, but to be able to trust that means to have the credit card and be able to make interactions, financial interactions, would require some amount of trust being built in there. And that's where having an identity solution tied with the messaging makes it meaningful for those transactions to happen.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. You make around friction. Typically, we've provided a verified, mobile cellular number to our banks. They often use that for two-factor authentication when we want to make a transaction or set up a direct debit. So the banks have got our phone number, and through the RCS framework, the operator obviously also has authenticated that phone number onto the network. So essentially, through an RCS channel, we could make it very easy for a user to go straight to their bank's chatbot and start viewing their account without any kind of user-based authentication. But of course, the issue there is always one of trust and whether or not the user actually is comfortable with the situation where, at least to them, it seems that they can seamlessly get access to their bank account without being challenged to identify themselves, even though in actual fact that could be happening in the background. So yeah, it'd be very interesting to sort of see how friction may need to be introduced into the user journey in order to give individuals that extra sort of comfortable feeling. But I guess then in terms of authenticating users at that level, so obviously from a device perspective, the operator, the cellular network, can assert the identity of the device and the linkage there to the phone number. But if there is a need to actually authenticate at a user level, have you got any thoughts there in terms of how that might be supported by the operator? Is this something perhaps that ties in with what the folk in the US are doing around Project Verify, perhaps? I don't know. Do you have any sort of thoughts on that one?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, sorry, I only caught half of it, and I only caught the last piece where you talk about Project Verify. I didn't catch anything else. Sorry, the connectivity was pretty bad.
No, don't worry. No, I was just kind of commenting on the need to perhaps authenticate at a user level for some of these kind of use cases. And I just wonder whether that's something that you've been looking at in terms of user authentication, and whether or not that ties in with perhaps some of the thinking around Project Verify, if you're able to talk about that.
Yeah, to be honest, we haven't tied the two together. I mean, my personal view would be it makes sense, but we do believe in the carriers having a strong play in the identity space, of both identity and authentication. Network capabilities that only the carriers can provide. And as it's public knowledge now, all the 4 carriers in the US have come together to form the Mobile Identity Task Force, and they have actually launched a joint venture called Project Verify that they are working to bring to the market an app-based authentication solution that would solve for some of these most of the carriers, and are working very closely with the financial institutes to make that capability available to the finance industry partners to kind of set or identity-based transaction. So a verified transaction or a verified identity is a lot more meaningful for a transaction's value, rather than something that needs to have multiple steps to authorize people. Whether it is trying to complete mortgage applications, consent-based data sharing for information between financial institutes, both legal and regulatory transactions that need to happen. I believe, we strongly believe that the Project Verify in itself can enable a lot of those identity and authorization interactions. And like we talked about the different economical or commerces, both conversational and transactions that are moving from the digital space into the text messaging space. I believe tying both of them together can have a significant enhancement to the platform that would enable a lot more commerce to happen through that space.
Yeah, I mean, I guess outside of RCS, a number of operators worldwide have already started providing services in the identity space. Operators are typically regulated within their markets to know who their customers are. They have touch points to customers through the high street and through their customer care centres. So they're very well placed for connecting with customers and being able to essentially create a digital identity for those customers that can then be used by the customers to assert their identity online. And we see a lot of different use cases around KYC verification and things like age proofing that operators are starting to explore in different markets. So, all these kind of capabilities can be brought into the RCS channel as well. So for instance, if you have someone that wants to interact with a chatbot to perhaps, buy some services or buy a product, and they need to provide information like a verified shipping address, that's something that, could be provided through the RCS interface itself, through the framework, rather than the user having to tap it in. So, often one of the big issues with mobile commerce in the past has been the necessity to ask the user to have to tap in their name, their address, their payment credentials, etc. And it can be as much as 150 taps, and the dropout rate on mobile can be very high. And that's often the benefit of a native app where you can do one-click purchasing. Although, of course, in Europe, you can no longer do that because of PSD2, but we won't go down that blind alley. So the whole concept of the operator bringing in their knowledge of the customer, giving the customer the ability to essentially be able to assert this information through a conversational channel so they can quickly make a query and a purchase is very, very interesting. I guess one thing that we haven't talked about too much yet is payment. So obviously there are opportunities for mobile operators to integrate their existing payment mechanisms into this, so perhaps through chatbot sessions you could essentially make a purchase and charge it to your mobile phone bill. Some operators also have other financial services products, whether that's credit or debit cards or e-money, etc. From your perspective, Pavan, in Verizon, I mean, where do you see payment fitting into this, and do you have any particular kind of financial instruments in mind that you think would be most beneficial for a conversational commerce type interface?
Yeah, like you mentioned, direct carrier billing would be one of the key, and that's the only payment solution that we Verizon have. And we would look at this as a natural transition from the current touch points, right? Today, you are able to go to Google Play Store and download a digital goods and have that bill to your bill. We would expect that to happen as long as a digital good to happen even on the RCS platform. Like if you want to have a digital store that sells emojis and stickers and other things at the short run, those could be charged to your bill. But I think to evolve to have some kind of payment clearinghouse on the back end, I think the transaction, it would vary, the success rate would vary depending on carrier and depending on what other solutions they have in place and how successful they have been in it. I don't think just because we have RCS, it opens up the space to do payments in there. But I think if there's already a payment solution in place, like you mentioned, if somebody is offering a credit card, having RCS helps enhance that experience.
Cool. Okay. I guess another area that we haven't really touched on yet
has left the conference
is how businesses will actually interact with the carriers to get access to this functionality. So I guess historically with things like SMS messaging, there might have been digital agencies curating campaigns, working with SMS aggregators around how to leverage the messaging channel to deliver those campaigns. So within the RCS space, do you see the carriers stepping up in terms of providing platforms directly to the developer community? Do you see yourselves working with partners in this space to create a set of tools that can be used by third parties for creating these rich campaigns over the RCS channel? What's your sort of perspective on what the value chain might look like and how it might work in practice?
Yeah, I think there are already a lot of chatbot platforms and chatbot enablers. If you go back to the early 2000s, there was a lot of platforms. I still remember Wix, I think they're still around, that provided the ability to build your own website. So I believe there will be a lot of chatbot platforms and chatbot building players in the space. I think it will be very fragmented. I think there's already a lot of them in that space. I don't think there would be one that's going to be the master of all, but there would be niche feature set within those. I believe there would be a lot of, I know a live person is one, solution that provides a connectivity between a chatbot and a live agent in the back end. So that's one space where there's a lot of AI work that's being done to figure out when would be a good switching point between moving from a chat bot to an actual live agent on the back end. So there would be some niche players that would provide that kind of interaction. And then there would be, like you mentioned, there could be entertainment and content-based specific providers that would provide some ability for somebody to render better coupons. So I think that it's going to be a space that would be very similar to websites before. I imagine there would be a lot of aggregators and sub-aggregators for very niche product sets, and nobody would have a one-stop shop for everything. It will be an amalgamation of multiple players playing in multiple aspects of RCS.
Yeah, I guess it's going to be a very rich ecosystem. A lot of different players, existing players building on their existing businesses around SMS messaging, new players coming in with new innovations. You touched on, the aspect of AI and automating chatbots to basically provide a way for users to be able to interact with a company and more intelligently find what it is that they're trying to find without having to go around the houses in terms of asking too many questions. I guess the artificial intelligence side of things is always going to be slightly controversial in terms of should the user know that they're actually talking to a bot rather than to a human. And I think this whole thing of switching from one to the other, I remember a story about a company working on AI who basically had a means of understanding where the user had reached a particular threshold where they really were getting fed up talking to a bot, and quickly diverted that particular line of inquiry to a human agent. But I guess, for yourselves within Verizon, do you see yourselves using the RCS channel and bots as a way of helping you to automate a lot of your customer care services to provide a better service to your customers? Is that something that you're looking to use, for your own purposes?
We already have it, not on RCS, but on we have our care chatbot that we use across all OS. And as we make RCS more ubiquitous on our Android footwear, on that side of the shop, we plan to definitely use the chatbots for RCS.
Oh, very interesting. So where do you see RCS really evolving, and in what kind of time frame, Pavan? So, we've talked about, the rich functionality. We've talked about integrating things like identity and payment and using AI to make these chatbots more intelligent. Is there anything holding RCS back? Is there anything holding this whole conversational commerce opportunity back? And how do you see it panning out over the next few years?
I think it's an evolving tech. It's just a matter of scaling. In the next 6 months, I would expect a significant critical mass in the United States that will start seeing a lot of traction in the RCS space. And once there is scale on the subscriber side, I expect RCS to quickly evolve from that point. I think initially the P2P interconnectivity is going to be the key, and I believe that's going to hit scale within the next 6 months or so.
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying is it's going to be a gradual progression. So people are going to start evolving from using the SMS channel to enhancing that using RCS, but in very similar kind of A2P type use cases, so things like the doctor's reminders, things like that. Users themselves will start using P2P and sharing information in much more innovative and richer fashion. And then over time, people will start experimenting with the channel and the use of bots as a way of interacting with their customers. I guess it'd be interesting to see whether the brands take a multi-channel approach. So do they retain their web-based channels, their app-based channels, and do they start mixing in chatbots? does chatbots start to replace any of those previous channels, or do they even use different channels in different ways, depending on the messaging and depending on the use case? I mean, do you think they'll have an omni-channel strategy, most brands, or do you think they will gradually migrate to the chat interface? I mean, there's been a lot of hype around chat with things like the smart speakers. Is it all hype? Are people really ready, do you think, to jump on board and make chat their preferred mode of interaction? Have we lost Pavan? Are you on mute,
Hey, can
Pavan?
you hear me?
No? Yeah, go on.
Can
You can hear you now. All good.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Connectivity issue again. So what I was trying to say was, even today we have coupons being mailed to the house, even though you have digital forms and apps and a whole bunch of other things happening. So I would think that this whole 360 communication to the consumer, it will gradually evolve. So you would still have SMS for a period of time, even though customers would continue to move on to RCS. But new use cases might be evolved where SMS can solve for them. But for cases that can be done richer in RCS, but can also be done in SMS, will continue to happen that way, because there's always going to be the long tail where customers have not upgraded to devices that can support RCS. There will be some small carriers
Has left
that
the
do
conference.
not have RCS. So there's a whole bunch of things. Hello?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So, if you look at the diffusion curve of, smartphones, whilst the growth penetration is quite impressive, they're still not necessarily reached that tipping point in a number of markets. There's always going to be occasions where you need to be able to fall back. And again, that's kind of one of the attractive benefits of using mobile channels, is that you can push a campaign out via RCS towards those devices that support it. You can quite easily fall back to basic text messaging via SMS to those that can't. And that way you can ensure that you can still actually reach the whole base. Whereas I guess for some of the OTT messaging platforms, there is a dependency there that your end customer has actually downloaded and installed that particular OTT app. Is there anything else on your side of things, Pavan, you'd quite like to talk about and get a message across to the audience today? Anything that we haven't covered?
Yeah, I think we had a good all-round talk about what is the possibility and where we are and where this can go. I'm really excited for the RCS space, especially in the US market, where text messaging is still the prominent way of messaging for consumers compared to other markets.
Okay, cool. Do we have any messages on Blue Jeans from anyone? No, everyone's still soaking up all the information. Okay, cool. So I think probably what we'll do then is we can round off the call at this point. So just really to summarize, some of the key points that we've been talking about today. RCS messaging really is building on the capabilities of the existing SMS messaging that's already ubiquitous and used widely by businesses for interacting with their customers. It brings that richer capability, the multimedia capability, the ability to be able to see whether or not users have clicked through so they can actually test the effectiveness of their campaigns. The operators, the carriers, they can bring in elements of identity and payment to really enable these channels to be used for conversational commerce, which is a very interesting and growth area. We see this with the smart speakers. This mode of interaction seems to be really resonating with a lot of consumers. And it's all underpinned with the security and the trust of the mobile networks that the carriers provide. So there's a number of intrinsic security functionalities within that, and they help to make the whole thing secure end to end. So with that, I'd like to thank Pavan for his interesting contributions today, and to Rich earlier on for giving us an overview of where Mobile Connect is going and the events in the MWC coming up in LA in October. With that, I'll say thank you to everyone for listening. I'm not sure we're going to be posting this. Yeah, we'll try and post this online, and then also you'll be able to find out when the next Hangout will be and the topic. And we're very interested in getting everybody's feedback and perspectives.